Okay, good morning, everybody. My iPad has 8 a.m. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to all of our guests. Cassie, would you like to go through the virtual meeting guidance? But is Ezra on yet? No. Okay, so Ezra may be joining us virtually. Okay, so Cassie, could you go through the guidance?
Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all. While the Commission and staff are in person, we are still offering a Zoom option so members of the public can attend. If you are attending virtually and would like to speak, you can do so during appearances by the public. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. The public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host if need be. Finally, Commissioners, please use your microphones while speaking and make sure your voice is directed towards the mic. When you are not speaking, please ensure your mic is off so others can utilize the mics. As a reminder, only 3 of the table mics can be live at a time. Also, please state your name before speaking for those who may be joining us via Zoom. Those are the decorum rules of the District Commission. Thank you for following them, and let's have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you, Cassie. Any announcements? No announcements. Okay, Eric Rear, you're going to introduce Cole Derringer, a maintenance planner.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Eric Rear, Maintenance and Reliability Manager for the district, and I'm here to introduce Cole Derringer. Cole will be our new maintenance planner. He'll be focusing on electrical and facilities maintenance departments. Cole comes to us from out west. He was a journeyman electrician, or has a journeyman's electrician's license from Wyoming and Colorado, and also a master electrician license in Colorado. His previous job was in oil and gas, where he helped plan large-scale projects for that industry, so kind of fit right in here. He also has a water and wastewater treatment experience from Fort Collins, Colorado area, and we're looking forward to moving the program forward in the district with his experience. Outside work, Cole is married. He has 1 4-year-old son or daughter? Son, okay. Fun fact, he moved his wife, 4 dogs, moved his wife, children, 4 dogs, 29 chickens in a U-Haul to get here. He's looking forward to a fresh start in Wisconsin. So please join me in welcoming Cole to the district.
Welcome, Cole, from the Midwest, or back to the Midwest, I guess, if you're in Ohio. Okay, any appearances by the public? I don't see any hands up. So we'll move to the consent calendar where we have the minutes of 6/12, cash statement operating. We have 5 different sanitary sewer extension plans. Authorization of increased total project costs, minor capital improvements for 2025, and acceptance of work of 2021 treatment plant HVAC improvement project. Oh, that's a long time. Do we have any questions on any of those items? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Commissioner Clark, I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Commissioner Clark, second by
Murphy. I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Murphy. Okay. Motion by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Murphy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay, that'll take us to topic. With the auditor's financial statements and audit findings. Shannon, Small, is she virtual or? Right there. Okay, didn't see it back there. Sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Thank you for having me. My name is Shannon Small. I'm a signing director with Clifton Larson Allen. I'm the individual responsible for the overall quality and delivery of the audit to the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. You have a short presentation, and a lot of this references back to the larger financial statements. So if you haven't had a chance to read through those, I always encourage a read through. They might help you sleep at night if you're having a little trouble with that. But if you have just a few minutes, start with the numbers and kind of skim through some of those pieces and that management discussion. And then I'm going to be talking through a little bit of the audit process, the scope, what we cover, a little bit of the process, just high level, presenting our opinion and communications, a couple of looking forward items then too with the industry highlights and some emerging issues. I spend most of my life looking backwards, so I like to take just a couple minutes before I finish with you to look forward as well. The end result of our audit is really three potential communications to you. The first is the report on the organization's financial statements. That's the opinion or the audit opinion. That's at the very beginning of the audit report. We also would issue to you any internal control or management letter findings that we have. So if we have any significant deficiencies, material weaknesses, or written communications to management on internal control findings, those come as well. And the last is our letter to governance. It gives you a little bit more of the results of the audit, a bit more context for how that audit opinion was arrived. Our audit is done on a risk-based approach, which means we don't look at every invoice and every transaction within your financial statements. We focus on your most significant balances and classes of transactions. These are likely the items that are already on your discussion points throughout the year. We do look at internal controls and the processes to help us inform and design our audit procedures, but we do not issue an opinion on those internal controls. The scope of the procedures is not broad enough to issue that opinion. We do look at revenue recognition, how the revenue is recognized, accounts receivables. We look at your debt, your covenants, your capital asset transactions, accounts payable, payroll transactions. And we also spend some time with your pension and your OPEB. Your pension is your participation in Wisconsin retirement system. So if you're looking through your financial statements, you're going to see a net pension liability for the last 2 years. Sometimes that's a pension asset. That represents the district's proportional share of the plan's overfunded or underfunded status. So in Wisconsin, WRS usually hovers somewhere between 95 and 105% funded. If it's overfunded, you guys have an asset. If it's slightly underfunded, you guys have a liability. An asset you can't use and a liability you can't pay. It's recaptured through future rate adjustments. You'll also see deferred inflow of resources and deferred outflow of resources. Those are items to help represent those changes that happen. The pension and OPEBs are very long-term estimates with several assumptions in them. Those deferred inflows and outflows represent kind of those shifts in assumptions and the overall long-term impact of those. Your OPEB is your other post-employment benefits. That's your insurance program for your retirees. That represents your promise to your current and future retirees for health insurance. I am pleased to report that we issued an unmodified opinion, or what's commonly referred to as a clean opinion in the industry. That's the highest level of assurance we can provide you as your auditors that your financial statements are free of material misstatements and presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We're bringing no material weaknesses and no significant deficiencies to you this year. So the one we had last year was fully resolved. We have no follow-up there. As you're reading through the opinion, you will probably see a little note for an emphasis of the matter, indicating the financial statements were restated for the adoption of GASB Statement Number 101, the presentation of compensated absences. If you're looking through that, seeing that restatement, that's not an indication of any errors or corrections that occurred. That's a new accounting standard that went into place in the current year, and the district adopted that. That results in a restatement all the way back to the beginning of the earliest year presented in your financial statements this year. So your statements are comparable. You'll see the 23 and 24 information. Those are fully comparable with the standard adopted for both years. So if you're looking through that, no need for concern on that standpoint. You'll see that consistently across all government organizations this year as that standard is adopted. It resulted in an increase in your liability, a little bit more clarity on the amount of accrued leave time that employees have. Just highlighting again here that restatement, you'll see that in the governance letter as well. It's just to inform you, if you laid last year's and this year's side by side, you will see some differences between those numbers, but it is that new standard. If you're looking for a little bit more context on how the numbers are arrived at, the notes in general will do that, but note 1 really gives you those policies and those concepts of the baseline understanding. We have no significant transactions, no adjustments, no uncorrected misstatements, no audit entries we're bringing forward to you, no difficulties with management, no consultations with other auditors, and we have no other matters to discuss. So my presentation is not terribly exciting this year. When I'm up here and telling you no, none, and nothing, that's always good news. I do want to put into a little bit of context the no uncorrected misstatements and no audit entries. What that really is a takeaway for you is the information you're receiving throughout the year is consistent with the information that is being presented in the audit report. So we're not making any adjustments there. Take a couple of minutes to just look at a few financial numbers. I know you guys get more current information to be able to make your decisions, but just a quick snapshot of some of that end of year information. Your balance sheet or statement of financial position really shows a lot of consistency, and I think that's the main takeaway here. Your largest variance really is in your capital assets and your debt for those planned capital projects, and then the pension-related items that your representation of your portion of WRS. A small change in funded status results in a more significant change on your balance sheet. So as you look through that, that's your primary driver there. It's not an indication that you aren't making your contributions to the pension plan. It's simply a reflection of where the pension plan stands on its funded status. A little bit of a visual of your net position. This is what's left after the assets and all liabilities are paid. The largest portion here is that dark blue portion. I know that's a little small. That represents the district's net position in its capital assets. So that's the pipes in the ground, the treatment plants, and all of the equipment, net of the debt that was taken out for it. So it's not really available for future planning or workflowing needs, but it does represent a large portion of the assets of the district. The portion that's really available for you for future planning and for cash flowing needs is that sort of orange portion up at the top. That would be kind of your planning or your working capital type items. The other pieces are restricted. That's restricted by outside parties, usually the DNR or bond documents. A little bit of a visual of your financial trends. This is your revenues, expenses, your net position. You'll see a general upward trend, and you'll see a little bit of a spike in revenue this year having to do with some different increases in flows and such. Again, a lot of consistency. So this is my chance to take a minute and look forward of what's coming up to give you a little bit of a picture of what your management team is going to have to deal with from GASB as they move into the future years. Most of these are footnote related or disclosure related, so we don't anticipate significant changes in the number presentation in the next couple of years, just a little bit of change in the format and some of the presentations in this annual report. Related to certain risk-related disclosures, collective bargaining agreements, not a big impact necessarily in Wisconsin or for the districts, but across the country may have some impacts. If there's limitations on revenues, if you have a large portion of your revenues coming from one or two sources, adding a little bit of clarity for the users of the financial statements. Some shifts in the reporting model. You'll see a little more impacts at the district than at maybe some of the surrounding municipalities because you are a proprietary fund or a business type fund only. A little bit of shifting of where numbers go on the financials, not so much what those numbers are, adding some additional subcategories, subtotals, and then some increases in the MD&A guidelines to create some consistency and a little more usability. Anytime a standard's been out there for a while, people tend to fall a little bit into some boilerplate language, so just updating what to include in there a little bit. So not a big impact, just if you look next year or next couple of years and it looks a little bit different in the organizational pattern, that's adoptions of new standards. More related to your leases, subscription assets, and some certain assets. That takes us through those biggest changes of what your management team is going to be looking at as they move forward. I am happy to answer any questions on the audit process, results, or if we get too deep into the numbers, I might look over my left shoulder to your team for some guidance.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to end with a thank you to your management team. I am a heavy lift of work for them in addition to their day jobs. I had to clarify there. To their day jobs as well, and we do appreciate they make us a priority. They prioritize working through any suggestions or best practices we bring to them. So we do appreciate their commitment to the audit. If you have any questions in the future, my contact information.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that will take us to the Inflow and Infiltration Reduction Program, an update.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Jen Hurlebus, Capital Planning Engineer, and have been the lead for the Inflow and Infiltration Reduction Program for the past 5 years. So I always like to start with what is inflow and infiltration. And the reason I kind of like to point out the reason why there's two words is because there's kind of two main sources. of what inflow and infiltration actually is. So inflow is typically more of your stormwater, or kind of the water above the surface of ground, and then infiltration is usually more of your groundwater sources, so below the ground. So the schematic is just kind of showing that there are lots of sources of inflow and infiltration. That's kind of a big takeaway to get from all of this, and that there's many owners of the system. So if you start on private property, in this schematic with the house, you can have improper sump pump connections. So that is something that is not allowed to go to sanitary. We want those sump pumps discharging to the surface onto your lawn, and because that is really just kind of that clear groundwater or stormwater that kind of goes through the ground and gets into that foundation drain, and we really don't need to treat that. We'd have to convey it and then also treat it. So there's a large cost there that we're trying to prevent. You can have some cases, people would connect their gutters also into those drains. There can be the lateral pipe can be cracked or break. That can also occur, obviously, in the local sanitary sewer or in the regional interceptors. And then you can have uncapped cleanouts. That's a big one. Even when you say like a commercial property, you have like larger cleanouts in like a parking lot or areas like that. That can be a large source of inflow. And root intrusions from trees or shrubs, that's typically more on the private lateral side. But, we can see it in local mains and in sanitary or the larger regional, depending on depth. So those are, it kind of seems like we're kind of picking on the private property, but those can be a lot of little sources that can really add up. So if we move into a little bit more on the municipal side, we can have, I'm going to bring up a picture. Open pick holes was often practice, and it is quite amazing if you calculate the amount of water that can come through that tiny little hole when you have, say, 6 inches of water standing over it, like we saw stormwater flooding on Monday. So that can be a big source that the fairly, but it takes time. It takes time to swap out all of those covers. And then here's an example of a poor connection. So a lateral pipe was connected into one of the district's manholes. It was not sealed very well around the core, and we had gushing water coming in at quite the rate. So that was an instance where we worked with the municipality. They worked with the private property owner. It was more of a company rather than a homeowner, and got that grouted and sealed up. So, but, if you think about all the, we have 1,500 manholes. Local municipalities have 10 times that, and then every single house connection. So, these, it's kind of the needle in the haystack when you're trying to tackle all of these potential sources. And then one thing that never really gets mentioned, but I like to show this picture. This is an example of a district manhole in the lower Badgerville Creek drainage way. So most of the time it's dry. This was during a March thaw a few years ago, and it becomes a raging river, basically. And in this case, once, it receded and we looked, these are more sealed, have extra precautions and the construction of the manhole because it's a fairly new manhole. But, if you think if there's any sort of cracks or leaks or anything, you just have this large amount of water that can just come inundating into the sanitary sewer. So we are required to work on reducing inflow and infiltration or preventing it. I like to say this is a maintenance program, and so it's called underneath your capacity management, operation, and maintenance program. It's a requirement. So this is a long-term maintenance program. And the NR 210 is the code that governs this. And basically the objectives are you're supposed to eliminate excess I&I. So there's a little bit of a difference there, right? Everybody understands that some is going to get into the system, but what we're trying to do is make sure that it's not being, it's not excessive. And the other, the ultimate goal is we're trying to prevent those sanitary sewer overflows. So can we make sure that we can convey the sanitary, wastewater within the sanitary sewer system, and that we're conveying it and treating it here at the treatment plant, that it's not escaping out into the environment. So when we're talking about this, right, one of the main goals, and what I was, saying, trying to prevent those sanitary sewer overflows, is that, we're designing the pipes for a certain amount of flow. And so, the sanitary flow usually is relatively small to, say, the capacity of the pipe. And so this graphic is kind of showing that, we know based on, average usage of wastewater that, we expect on an average day that we're going to get a certain amount of what we call base flow. And like on the right, there's still going to probably be some inflow and infiltration. Typically, I would say that's more infiltration, kind of what you might have every day. That's a little hard to distinguish, right? As if it's, kind of there's some cracks and some leaks in the pipe or the joints, you're seeing that typically every day. And then if you have a storm event and you have more of those inflow sources, that's where you start seeing something more on the left, right? Where now you've got, for a period of time, you're going to have more of that clear water getting into the system, but then that should recede as the rain event passes, or depending on how long it takes for that to kind of come down. And why we care is because we want to make sure that we can convey what we're getting. And so the less inflow and infiltration that we get in the system, there's more available capacity for future growth. So when we're designing a pipe, we're looking out 70 years, and we're trying to predict, what is that growth? How much more will that base flow end up increasing? And then we also apply what we often call a safety factor in engineering, or we call it a peak factor when we're talking about inflow and infiltration. Is again, that kind of we expect that we're going to get some on occasion. For district, it's a peaking factor of anywhere between 2.5 to 4. So at 1 MGD, it's a 4 peaking factor, and then it goes down to 2.5 once you hit 20 MGD. So you're kind of usually in that 3 range, somewhere around there. So when we started talking about really developing an I&I program or expanding on more of the, the district, has been doing things for I&I for a long time. It's part of your maintenance, it's part of your general practices, best practices. We have benefited from always being a separate sanitary system and not having combined sewers to try to disconnect and deal with that. The peaking factors and the amount of I&I the district has seen has really been very low compared to a lot of our other regional entities that we would compare to. So this has been, but the 2018 very large storm events saw massive flooding and the amount of rain. We did have some SSOs from that event, and that really brought the community at one of the community meetings that we had brought I&I as kind of a big topic in 2019 that we really wanted to start putting a little bit more attention to. So in 2020, we formed an advisory committee of 6 representatives from our customer communities and started just exploring what are other people doing for I&I. So we spent a lot of time in 2020. What does King County do for their I&I program? What does Hampton Roads in Virginia do? And just talking about what everybody else is doing and what do we like, what do we don't like, what are some of our concerns. What came out of a lot of that was, we looked at programs ranging from, education only to a regional entity went and basically took ownership of everything. They were under a consent decree, replaced a whole bunch of infrastructure, and then turned it back over to the municipalities. right? Like, so kind of extremes. And not, thinking that that's where we're going. It's just more of like, what can you kind of say, hey, that's a good idea, or that's a good concept, or, maybe that's not something we're doing right now, but, if it gets really bad, like, you may have to go to something like that. So, a lot of just kind of talking and really getting an understanding. Some of the big takeaways from that, is that there was strong concern about the district being, that it would be like this big regional program, and that the district would be, in a sense, the banker, right? And so that was ruled out immediately. And so where we, because there was concerns, right? Because again, if I get back to the owners, each municipality is responsible for their own system that then feeds into the district system. So it gets challenging when you're trying to do, say, a regional program of, really who's going to be responsible or paying for what. And so the approach has been more, the district can provide these technical and educational resources to help our communities and kind of fill in some of those gaps, because they may not have engineering on staff. They may not have, a communications person on staff. So the district can help, because we have a shared goal, is to make sure that we're, able to treat the wastewater that we get here at the wastewater treatment plant. And obviously the infrastructure where it's shared, that's what the district is responsible for. So, so that's been always, that was kind of early on, and that's the approach that we've been taking. So when we started then digging into a little bit more of, okay, well, in 21, then the questions I kept getting asked were, how big of a problem do we have, and how much is this going to cost? Those are really hard questions to answer. It seems like it's easy, but it's not. So we spent about a year and a half updating our hydraulic model, and really looking at kind of scenarios of, future conditions and worse storms, and what does that look like? How is the system responding? Realizing that there are some limitations because we had a limited data set in order to calibrate that model to, or some inconsistencies with, well, I shouldn't say inconsistencies. We have great resilience in certain parts of our system where flow can split and go divert in other directions, and that makes it really hard to then quantify. So now, instead of think you have two areas and you can't, you have to combine them together when you're looking at that data set, because depending on how it's being operated, you can have flow coming from a much larger area than what you thought. And so what the result of that was, and the big recommendation is, you need more data. We need more flow monitoring data. So in 23, then we started developing a plan for what would a flow monitoring program look like, right? Recognizing that big undertaking, we need to plan for it. And are we prepared to do this? Do we have the resources? Do we have the people? How are we going to manage the data? What are we going to get from it? What are the answers we're trying to question? So, so last year we started doing what I would call a flow monitoring study. We put flow meters in. We had 5 flow meters, and then we rented 2 others a little later, and we rotated them around, checking out what were some of these proposed locations that our consultant had said we think these would be good locations for monitoring. And when I'm saying monitoring, it's usually still larger areas, more for a long term. We're looking for that. Can we start quantifying in the base flow the difference between sanitary versus some of that groundwater infiltration? And that takes me usually almost 3 years. You need that seasonal variation. And so, this takes a long time to start answering some of those questions. And along the way, you get even more questions that come up. So lots of learning, lots of good stuff, lots of things that don't necessarily go as planned, like why can't we get a cell signal in this one region when we're in the middle of the town, and we're not getting the data sent back to where we want it. So, and then a parallel track. So I would say, flow monitoring is what I call that more technical side, and then the educational side is what is the DRIPS program. And This, so DRIP stands for Disconnect and Reduce Inflow and Infiltration to Private Sewers. So this is an educational only program that is to start generating awareness. So as I mentioned with the advisory committee, a lot of the discussions in the last 2 years was around, okay, private property, right? There's lots of places, lots of sources. The age of laterals is, reaching that 70-year mark. Usually, I mean, a homeowner hasn't even thought about their private lateral. It's not part of a home inspection. And so we really started at the basics and, really, what is this? What are the things, a whole flyer on sump pumps, just trying to show the difference of, a direct connect versus how it should be connected. Understanding that private property sewer laterals are the responsibility of the homeowner all the way to the main, even if the main's out in the middle of the street. So if something happens to their lateral and it's underneath the street, that's on the property owner, which, believe it or not, my husband didn't know that until 2 years ago. So there's a lot of education that needs, and just awareness of, really, what we need to people to just start understanding this and thinking about it. So that was the biggest ask that we had, I think, from our communities, and this provides them information that they can give. It can be adapted into presentations, social media. So the district this summer is going to start promoting more of this content on our social channels and encourage our customer communities to share that information too. So a little bit, just wanted to give an example of the flow monitoring study while we're talking about this. And so just an overview of kind of where we're at in one of the flow monitors that's in right now. So this is in the pump station 1 service area, and so the 2 shaded areas, the total, all of that flow ends up at pump station 1, which is First Street and Gorham or Johnson, and where the new public market is being constructed. Our pumps, so to the right, the little closer zoomed in, so our pump station 1 is the red square there, and public market is just to the left in the kind of lighter shading. And we put in a flow monitor in a manhole right at the corner there. So the blue are district gravity lines coming into the pump station, and green is local sewer, and the red is force mains coming out of the pump station. And so we kind of have maybe 3 main gravity, or there's 2 main gravity lines that come into the pump station. One, the green coming to the south, like, branches pretty quickly into 2 main areas. So in some ways, you can kind of break out the big service area into, say, 3 main portions that would contribute flow at the pump station. So the idea is to, well, here's a little more close-up of we have non-contact battery-operated flow meters installed at this location. And why I'm going to kind of specify that is there's lots of different meters, lots of different ways. They can be a ring and an insert. They can, be, pressure or bubble sensing in the flow. And it depends on, how much flow. And so there's a lot of considerations that go into all of this. Some of the recommendations, from our consultant were, in some applications, they were, it would be more ideal for long-term monitoring to install, say, more of a flume with power and PLCs and all of that. And so that gets expensive. And so the decision after a lot of this learning, too, is we're just not comfortable or prepared to make that kind of a commitment to put in, say, a dedicated structure with power and PLCs, because, we're still trying to, understand where are the best places for these. And you can't just put them anywhere and expect to get good results. You have to have very, certain hydraulic conditions and a certain amount of flow. And so there's a lot of details that could go into this. By using a non-contact battery operated with cell service, we can move this. If this turns out to not be a great location, we just pull it from the manhole and we move it to another manhole. And so this is a very low risk for us to kind of keep growing at a slower pace, and, you know, learning and making sure that we're doing this, in a very thoughtful way. And so in this case, you know, they were just able to reach down, pull up the, controller. We were checking, with the computer, making sure that the setting was, you know, reading what we were. So, you know, after the first install, of that bracket, you know, it should not require entry unless we have to actually, there is a way to try to pull the meter. Sometimes that doesn't work so well, but in general, then, this has been in place for three or 4 months, and maybe every 6 weeks we're swapping out the battery. And, you know, if there's an issue or we want to check on something, we can just go and do that from the surface. So, and so here's an example of the data we've been getting. So 90 days worth of data. We put this in early in March. And, you know, I had hoped to get it in a little earlier to get a little bit more of that winter baseline flow. We got it in, I would say, a week before we started having some snow melt and a couple of rain events. And so this is a pretty good example of where you're seeing some spikes when we get some rain. May 1st, we had a little bit of rain, I think, couple of days before, and then we had just 1.8 inches of rain on May 1st. And it jumped up pretty quick. We are at a peaking factor of 3.95, so our sewer use ordinance says that if we would have a peak hourly flow 4 times the average flow, that would be a violation of our sewer use ordinance. And so we're just underneath that. But if you notice too, the next couple of days we had a little bit of rain still, May 2nd, May 3rd. So it took a little while for that red hydrograph, is what we call that, for that to kind of come down.
What's on the left?
The left is the
y-axis.
The y-axis is the amount of flow in million gallons per day.
Okay, and so what's the capacity of the pipe able to handle?
This pipe is actually a little oversized. It's about 23 MGD. Yeah, it was about half. So there's an example too, right, where if you have designed the pipe for, say, future flow, or maybe flow conditions have changed over time, we do benefit in some cases where the pipe is oversized and can allow a higher peaking factor without causing a problem. And so yes, and the blue, thank you for interrupting me because I forgot to explain the graph before I jumped in. The blue is trying to take that dry weather flow, is what we call it. So kind of based on what we're seeing in the pattern, it can generate kind of that same kind of a graph to kind of show what would you expect on an average day. And the reason why it's right now, it's probably a little high because we don't have that much data. So it's just taking what I have out of those 90 days and kind of trying to come up with that average daily pattern. If we had longer record of data and we had more winter months of that, we would probably see that tighten up and come lower over time. That's where it's without that, you know, multi-year worth of continuous data. That's what you're trying to get, is kind of tighten that up and really truly define what should be the, you know, average wastewater flow with probably some groundwater infiltration. We're on the isthmus right next to all the, you know, Tenny right there. So we know there's got to be some groundwater infiltration, but you know that is okay, right? We're within the pipe. It's once we start seeing those big spikes, and especially if it continues for a long period of time, that's where it starts getting concerning. Is, you know, that's probably too much, and where is it coming from? Yeah.
So the downside of that would be we might end up with a peaking factor above 4, we had more baseline data at this location
Yes,
for that May 1st peak.
yes. Yes, that is true. Right, because we're taking it compared to an average daily flow, and you know, how an average flow in the summer months could be higher than the average flow in the winter months. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any data from peak? I mean, it was 2.5 inches. Does that mean we went over?
You know, I haven't actually looked. I was at SOAR with my son the last 2 days, and I didn't log in this morning. Yeah. That was the first thought I had Monday night was, well, my presentation has already been submitted, and I know they're going to ask, how did it look?
The other question I have, do you ever think about going upstream, figure out what's causing it? I mean, so it's a problem here. If you go upstream, you figure out where the stream starts.
Yeah, so that is a big challenge, and one of the things that why I'm saying I'm a little cautious on this program too. And, you know, maybe is a great discussion point for the district, right, in this role. In these cases, we were trying to say, okay, let's start chunking out one large area into two, you know, or a metered area and an unmetered area. Do we see a response in this area? You know, and then using pump station data down, trying to at least come up with some sort of a volume balance, right? Okay, yep. Now we're seeing something, right? So yes, I would love to just go and deploy a bunch of monitors and go do a huge study. But, you know, what does that really mean? Are we going up into the local lines and looking at it? Is that the district's responsibility, or is that our municipality's responsibility? So these are a lot of questions that I don't really have answers to yet, right? This is the start of, can we start getting something that, I kind of like to use these as almost calibration points too. Is it more the district's responsibility to have these more downstream points, and we start partnering and working with our communities of where, you know, how are we going to do this together? You know, or, you know, because yes, this would take a lot more effort and resources and people that, you know, right now we're not positioned to do that.
So do we have any idea of how much of that flow is coming from residential areas on a baseline daily kind of a thing, and then from a storm event? And then another question is, as a homeowner, how would I know that I have a problem with tree root infiltration and a broken pipe if I don't have, you know, a backflow into my basement or anything? So, you know, how would I know that?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, right? It's not causing the homeowner a problem, but it is causing the public system a problem. So we had an example of one where we were trying to line one of our pipes, and the amount of infiltration coming in from a direct connection, a private lateral right to a district interceptor, was so much that the contractor, we couldn't get it, we could not line that section of pipe. We had reached out to the homeowner. We weren't home, but they got us into the house. We had basically most of your plumbing companies now have cameras that they can put down the laterals, so that's what we did. Went from the house and out to the main. It was broken in several spots. Showed the video to the homeowner, but yeah, it's not causing a backup into their house, and so there's really no incentive for them to fix it. And in this case, it was very deep, and it would be under a driveway, and it would be very expensive for them to do that. And so it is still leaking, and we have not been able to line that part of our pipe.
This is Bill Walker, Deputy Executive Director. I want to make a budgetary point here to emphasize some of the things Jen has been saying. She's emphasizing the importance of developing a flow monitoring program, focusing on particular monitoring points, and so on that earlier map to give you information about broader areas. This idea of then digging deeper and learning more is sort of part of the plan. But it's really important to understand why we're taking this gradual sort of broad first approach, it's because dealing with every conceivable I&I issue is impossibly expensive and not worth it. And the task here is to find the parts of our system and help municipalities understand the parts of theirs where it is cost-effective, worthwhile to address issues. We're in a good position as the sort of regional provider to initiate that analysis, start to hone in on places where things matter, and direct ours and help municipalities direct their resources to what's most important.
Yeah, and to, I guess, just to, when you were saying, you know, no, we don't know where all of this is coming from. I mean, I have, and it's more, I guarantee it's more than one place, right? So there is like a old closed landfill that happens to be in this tributary area. How much of that is just, we have to fill the leachate that's coming from that closed landfill. So you would need to monitor upstream and downstream of that to try to start breaking that out. And then, you know, there's 2 municipalities that contribute flow to this area. They have, you know, there's maybe some local lift stations that maybe would provide some data. And then, you know, yeah, do people have pumps connected? Do they have those things? So, you know, it's getting back to the kind of, it's a needle in a haystack, and it's not just one place.
So thinking about the low-hanging fruit, you know, just what are your ideas right now based on what you know? What are the low-hanging fruit that we can start to look at?
I think that's why we've focused on the DRIPS program and starting to generate awareness. You know, make sure people know that they shouldn't have their sump pump connected. I know municipalities have been working on swapping out covers that have open pick holes. You know, can you make a change that instead of plastic open or cleanouts, plastic cleanouts in, say, a gas station parking lot that are going to get cracked and dinged every single time, you know, swap them out with a heavier duty metal, you know, that's sealed. You know, I think there's a lot of little things that can be done pretty simply that you just start making as part of your best practices. And I think, you know, the more we can try to start putting in some more of this, getting this data, at least in chunking out areas, and starting to get more of that baseline. I'm going to actually flip to the next slide here because this is going to, I think, emphasize my point. So all the hatched with the proposed, there's the kind of the first round was to have 18 locations and then get up to, I think, a total of 40 locations, and that this would at least give us breaking out some of these the larger 18 basins into, you know, hopefully at least like 2 areas per, and start doing more of that, like say volume balance and seeing some of the responses. But that's a large amount of data. So that's been the real kind of eye-opener, I think, this year for us, is that we don't have the resources to really get into the data management tools, and I don't have the time to manually keep up with this. So that's been really a hang-up of, you know, I mean, flow monitoring is not just you put the flow meter in, it just magically works, right? It's definitely very technically involved. It does require that O&M maintenance. We need the collection services crew to help with that and keeping up with that. And, you know, so the long-term goal, right, is to continue to build this data set so that then we can start narrowing the areas of where to look, and then start, if we do start seeing more problems, right, we can more pivot into, you know, focusing on those areas where, to Bill's point, are going to make the most difference. But that, you know, that's part of the discussion when we had the like regional approach versus the kind of everybody on their own individual. You know, what is that goal? You know, is it really, you know, because one community may say, well, then you're just picking on me, right? Because if I have the most volume, then, you know, I should, you know, how are we doing that? And how do you distinguish between really the benefit for the regional system versus, you know, the responsibility?
So I would just think this would be a benefit for the regional communities in cost saving, because there's less flow coming into the system if they do find out, you know, what their biggest contributors would be. So, you know, that might be something that, you know, we could look at. I suppose you need more data for that?
Yes. Yeah, and that high-level cost and capacity analysis, right, showed that they're still, because of the growth of the area, we still need, one of the questions we wanted to answer was, would we still need, like, treatment plant upgrades, if we could reduce? And the overall, looking at all the combinations of the solutions, because we're still such a growing area, we would still need some upgrades at the treatment plant in the future. That was still the most cost-effective, was a combination of I&I reduction, but you would still do capacity upgrades just to meet those needs. You couldn't do it all alone with just I&I reduction, and it was much more expensive to do it that way.
Yeah, more of a comment to Commissioner Freeze. So from a practical perspective, the way this data is used, or, you know, when Jen and Todd give, a lot of times what will happen is Madison Met operates all of our lift stations, okay? So in addition to all the big ones that they have, they also operate all of the local lift stations for us. I actually don't know, Jen, do you do that for all the communities, or is it just for us?
There are some other communities that we also maintain their lift stations, but not all of them.
Okay. And so a lot of times during heavy rain events, the most recent one I can think of is we had a historical problem at the John Street station, which is over by Olbert Gardens, the soccer fields, right, or the baseball fields right there. And we were getting, I think Jen had 4 is what we designed for, a factor of 4 peaking. We were getting, I think, during run times of 10. And from a practical perspective, what the city then did is we looked at that watershed and we really hit it heavily with our lining program. So we go through and line the mains. Now, that doesn't address all the private laterals, which are clearly part of the problem. We do a lot of PR to try and get people. So the question is, when do people know there's a problem? When they have backup, right? Now, we send stuff to everybody and do outreach to try and really tell people, if you live in a house that is, I'm going to say pre-78, chances are you have either a clay or a cast iron lateral. Either one should be cleaned every year. Okay? You should hire a company to be cleaning them every year, especially if you have a tree sitting right over the top of them. But that only keeps it clean so you don't have a backup. That doesn't mean it stops the infiltration, right? And for the most part, it is really pricey to try and fix a lateral infiltration. You have 2 choices, basically: move and replace, which is highly disruptive, or you can line it. And that's usually pretty pricey as well. And most homeowners, again, because it's owned by the homeowner, right, there's no incentive to do that because it's I&I picked up after their billing. So the community at large, in my case, the city of Madison, pays that bill. So it is, you know, eventually you're going to have to do that. But at the level we're at, what we try and do is use data that Jen and Todd give us to triage where we should spend public dollars to tighten up the public part of the system. And that's also true for, like, loadings. Todd typically, like, once or twice a year, will flag me and say, your loadings are for a certain parameter, perhaps, are increasing in this one area, right? That's all they know because they measure it at the lift station. I then have to go and do exactly what Jen was talking about and trace that up the system and try and find out where that is. And sometimes you can't. Those types of things become very intractable to, you know, sometimes you can narrow it and go, oh, well, I have a very big industrial customer, I'm going to start there, right? Sometimes it's, well, I'm gonna monitor literally every 2 blocks and see if I can see where that drops off. So it's hard to do. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give you a perspective from a community's side of how we use the data that the district provides. And you can do smoke tests and other things as well, but usually a community knows if you have clay pipe that is from the 50s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, that's your problem. Okay, and you can start with a lining project if it's lineable to reduce.
Just wondered, so say that rate went to 6 through the last rain. Is that a CMAR requirement to tell them that we went over, or what is, I mean, we're supposed to only go to 4 per our...
There's not a state actual requirement.
Okay.
It's written in our sewer use ordinance. And what we would do is, you know, at least what is currently on the sewer use ordinance, right? It's very simple, simply stated. If the district has noticed exceedance of the 4 times the peak hourly flow, we reach out and let the community know that we've seen this, or communities. Usually we just kind of try to share the data, have a little bit of a discussion, any sort of kind of, you know, was there anything unusual going on? You know, what's kind of this? So it's, at this point, it's usually been more of an awareness discussion. There is a statement in there about a work plan, but what that means and how that's been defined has also been one of those things that we're just, you know, lots of questions and not really sure, like, where that would go to. And you know, at this point, we don't have a regular history of SSOs or problems, and so, you know, I think that's been more of our approach is let's just keep working on getting more information and more data, and then we are in a better position that if things start going south, we're kind of, you know, we've gone through a lot of this legwork and what we've been doing. So then we can address that.
This is Bill Walker again. I want to jump in this time not to make a budget point, but to make a legal point, to repeat something Jen said at the beginning. To add to the points Jen made, there's no regulatory requirement for reporting sort of type things. However, I believe it was first or second slide, there is a requirement for managing and limiting sanitary sewer overflows, and addressing I&I is an element of that. Second, correct. Yep. There's some subtle language there, but the point is there is a state requirement that is one of the drivers for our I&I program, even though it doesn't have sort of a real-time reporting component.
Could you go back to the prior slide where you had flow in that? Yeah. So the question I have, do you know, and you may not know the answer to this question, is this pretty typical of our interceptors, that the flow, you know, that you have a 24 million gallon pipe with the base flow being at, I don't know, what is that, 3 million gallons? Is that, I mean, are pipes that much bigger? No?
No.
That Askermeyer used to come to?
Yes.
That's probably.
Yes.
What's our normal percent of base flow for, including I&I and normal flow in a typical interceptor that we, 30%?
I mean, I guess the only way I can really assess that at this point would be, you know, kind of based on what we see at the plant. And, you know, we used to always say, you know, even the plant, it was like a 2.5, right? So it's a pretty tight system, in general, right? Yeah. Because that's kind of the really only downstream total flow, value that I have. And like, you know, what this is also giving is more information and kind of checks on some of the other, data points that we have. So, like at this instance, I realized that something's not quite right with the flow meter volume recording at the pump station. So it's a really old meter. It needs to be swapped out. So that's why you know, we're learning a lot, and this is all really valuable information. Maybe a counterpoint is a different flow meter that I have in right now that's along, I would say it's more by Elver Park. I'm not seeing a big inflow response. So it's more of an infiltration response. But again, I can't really decipher, I'm not seeing enough of a differentiation within the past 90 days to try to understand how much of that is the groundwater. I can talk about I&I for hours, so.
I did have more questions that I had written down, but I think you covered most of them in your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay. That was just for information. Nice questions, everybody. Thank you. Eric, Amanda's gonna give the, executive director report about our session with the customer community leaders.
Amanda Wagner, Communications and Public Affairs Director. Didn't quite know I was giving this update, but we had our commission and community listening session back on Wednesday, June 11th. I know a number of folks here at the table were in that session. That is one of Eric's first-year goals. So we have completed that goal. There is a report in the commission packet today that our facilitator, Allison Lebwall, had produced for us. So it does include all of, for those who were there, she did lead the group through a future-looking exercise, and we had 3 groups. Each had one of our customer community representatives. So if you recall, the goal specifically said a listening session with commission and a representative of each of the 3 appointing authorities, so City of Madison, Dane County Cities and Villages Association Executive Council, and the Dane County Towns Association Executive Council. So we broke it up so that it ended up being 2 commissioners and 1 community representative at each table. And they went through a kind of future-looking exercise. What would the headline be? What would the article say in 5 years if information, communications, rate setting, all of that, budget, all of that was improved. So all of those materials are provided in that report. Overall, the event went well. Clearly, several of you were there and experienced that. Allison, our facilitator, did do an evaluation, and it got good ratings as a good use of time and felt like a valuable conversation. So in terms of next steps, this information, this report, we will share it out with all of our customer communities in Eric's forthcoming Flush and Flow email. All of our monthly email. All of the commissioners are on that email, so this will be provided more broadly. All of the themes were kind of aggregated in there. We have included all of the notes, so it's there for you to look back on, to share with your constituencies, and we're just really happy with the outcome of that event.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Eric? Nope. Okay. Greg, or Ezra, you're first. Anything on the executive director? You're up there, right?
Sure. Morning, everybody. Well, a few things. We're right in the middle of the survey process of various folks on staff for the 6-month executive director review. So just this week was the deadline for directors and direct reports to the executive director to get back to us, and employee leadership council folks to get back to us on that. So the subcommittee will have some results in July, and then at some point, I don't remember exactly when, this summer, we'll bring those back to the commission. So that process is happening. We've been working on the request for proposals for a consultant to help with looking at the long-term annual review process for the executive director, sort of revisiting our policy on that and thinking about what we want that to look like going forward, acknowledging we've done a good job about it in the past, but it's been really time intensive for commission back when we kind of ran the whole process. It's still a pretty involved process, the way we've done it more recently with the consultant's help. And so kind of revisiting that fundamentally and thinking about what that ought to look like. So we'll be bringing somebody on starting, I think it's in September. After that process plays out, I'll be participating with staff in the ranking of the submittals that we get back and that sort of thing. And then the subcommittee as a whole will make a decision about that. So that's a piece of what we've got moving. And then third thing is we just had the chance this week at our meeting to meet the executive coach that's come on board to help Eric here for the next year. And a really good process there that seems like it's going to add a lot of value, of course, for Eric, but also for the district as a whole. So we just got kind of briefed and had a chance to meet the coach yesterday or earlier this week anyway. That's what we're up to at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Greg, report for finance?
Yep, we met, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. We meet again this coming Monday. Bill has drafted a resolution for the capital, operating, and debt service reserve policy that will be presented. We've going around, there's a couple of comments. Dan had some really good comments in there and a couple of questions. We'll address those this coming meeting. And then we're going to move on to a couple other issues going through the policy book and addressing financial things through that. But the resolution will come back to the commission for the big ones in July sometime, I think is what Bill is shooting for. And thanks to Bill for writing that up. Because that would normally have been Ben, and Ben's not here, so so we appreciate that, Bill. That's it. So we're making good progress.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to Matt Sibes, going to give the operations report. Ellen must be on vacation.
Good morning. Yes, Alan is on vacation. Eric let him leave for once. So I'm Matt Seib. I'm the Assistant Operations Manager filling in for Alan. I'll be given the May operations report. No news is good news. Things were great in May. We had a great month. Everything is, kind of consistently average. So we're kind of right in the middle of all of our performance metrics in terms of what we're releasing in our effluent and staying well below our permit limits. So that's great. I've said to you in the past when I've given this report, what you don't see on the screen is all the work that went into making that happen. There were a lot of tanks that had to come down. There was equipment that needed to be fixed. Hundreds of work orders were completed to maintain equipment. Many thousands of person hours were invested last month to make this chart for you. So it was a great month, very successful. One tiny little footnote, though, is we did have a TFO, a treatment facility overflow. So this was related to some maintenance work that is ongoing. We're doing some digester cleaning again this year. A contractor that is cleaning out one of those tanks had a hose burst on them while they were pumping material out of that tank. The reason that hose burst is because at that point they started essentially pumping sand, and hoses and pumps don't like that. This happens because this is struvite mineral precipitation, and this happens in our digest. This is very common for us. After this occurred, the contractor immediately changed their process so that they wouldn't run into this kind of issue again. So we did resolve the issue. We lost about 100 gallons of material as a result of this. And as you can see from the picture, it's mostly a gritty material. It's not like raw sewage. And this was completely contained to the plant. It was just kind of in the area of the grass here. But this is something we do need to report. We are reporting it, but this was related to an outside contractor performing work on site. Any questions about any of that?
Nope. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Vanessa?
Good morning, Commission. I have a legal services update and then a couple of regulatory notes I'd like to make today, too. So for the last month, we have been working on a number of contract reviews, and that's including, as kind of the most significant project, the beginning of review of ERP work and the contract documents associated with that ERP work. We also reviewed a number of easement documents over the last month, continued work on the sewer use ordinance updates for the district, and have been working on a number of open record request responses along with the district staff as well. I guess a couple of items I want to note specifically. So we've also continued work on the Badger Mill Creek litigation, and on June 16th, we received a decision from the Circuit Court affirming the Department of Natural Resources' decision to grant the amendment request for the district. So there is a process by which the City of Verona, who had challenged that DNR decision, could appeal. That appeal would be due on July 31st. So there's kind of an open period right now where we'll wait to see whether the city chooses to appeal the Circuit Court decision. We also, if you'll note on the agenda today, have a closed session scheduled, so that will include a discussion more specifically on the legal strategy regarding that Circuit Court decision and this ongoing litigation. Two other legislative items I want to note, just updates from the last regulatory report. So on the Clean Water Fund work that the district's been engaging in on increasing the revenue bonding authority for the Environmental Improvement Fund, which includes the Clean Water Fund, the Joint Finance Committee unanimously approved the increase of $726 million that was recommended, that we've been supporting and was recommended by DNR. We are still waiting on the final budget. It's supposed to be Monday. I don't know if that, or July 1st, I think. I'm not sure if that's going to happen or not. There's still a lot of discussions ongoing with the budget overall, but certainly very positive that the Environmental Improvement Fund request that we've been working on was unanimously approved. So more to come on that depending on the budget process. And then just this morning, I saw that the two PFAS bills that we talked about in the last regulatory report introduced by Senator Wimberger that relate to liability for contamination potentially associated with PFAS, including in biosolids land application. Those two bills just got scheduled for a hearing on, I believe, Tuesday, in the committee on the Senate Committee on Natural Resources. Yeah, Tuesday, July 1st at 11 a.m. So we'll be following those bills closely, and we'll work with the district on potentially providing comments on those bills. That's all the updates from me. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for anybody? Nope. Okay, so that will take us to future meeting schedule. That's in the packet. I can't remember what meeting it is that we have Eric's 6-month first meeting in July. Yep. Okay. And then we have a closed session that we're going to go into today. The commission may convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute, Section 19.85, paren 1, paren G, conferring with legal counsel is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy with respect to Circuit Court case number 2024-CV-3109, City of Verona versus Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Commissioner Buckland, I'll move to go into closed session.
Motion by Commissioner Buckland, second by
Commissioner Freeze.
Second by Commissioner Freeze to go into closed session. Roll call.
Commissioner Buckland,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Freeze, Commissioner Hubble,
Aye.
Commissioner Lankella,
Aye.
Commissioner Lytle,
Aye, with the usual caveat that I will not take part, as my role at the City Council in Verona would create a conflict.
Commissioner Meyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Murphy,
Aye.
Commissioner Paltz.
Okay, motion carries, so we'll go over to the other room, for closed session. Ezra back yet?
Commissioner Meyer says that Zoom is not letting him back into the main meeting. I don't think he needs to be here. We still have a quorum.
We had a motion by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Freeze. So his button wasn't able to work, but, so we're gonna move on. We had a motion by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Freeze, to enter back into open session. The roll call vote was unanimous by all present members, all of us, because Ezra was participating. And I just have to report that the commission received an update on the, City of Verona versus Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources case that we are party to, and we discussed legal strategies. So we'll leave it at that. Okay. And let's see, any future agenda topics? Any other business? Motion to adjourn. Ken.
So moved, Commissioner Clark.
Motion by Commissioner Clark, second by
Commissioner Freeze?
Commissioner Freeze to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.